Will come to order, and I just want to welcome Acting Secretary Sue to the Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education Subcommittee. Pleased to have you here and hear about the budget for the coming year, and look forward to your testimony. Of course, as we know, the role of the Department of Labor is to foster, promote, and develop the welfare of wage earners in the United States, to also improve their working conditions, and to advance their opportunities for profitable employment. The purpose of this hearing this morning is to review the FY25 budget request. While there are many open jobs in the economy, persistent and painful high inflation driven by the Democrats' out-of-control spending and regulatory overreach has burdened the American workforce and their families for more than 2 years. Last week, the department that you're in charge of reported that consumer prices were up 3.5% this week from a year ago. Everyday essentials like groceries, rent are more expensive. And as I've said before in these hearings, inflation is a tax on every American. Continued high inflation in our country is unacceptable and should be a number one concern for all of us. I'm concerned that the budget request attempts to go around discretionary limits that are established in the Fiscal Responsibility Act by calling for the creation of a new $8 billion mandatory training program. Out-of-control mandatory spending got us into this fiscal mess, and it's certainly not the tool that will get us out of it. On a more positive note, I do appreciate that this budget request no longer includes the partisan Civilian Climate Corps proposal that was included in last year's proposal. But I'm disappointed that you continue to call for the creation of a new sector partnership grant program that has been repeatedly rejected by Congress. The presumption that local employers, educators, training providers, or state and local government officials need a federal grant to collaborate is indicative of a top-down, command and control approach to economic development that simply does not work. I'm concerned that the budget request demonstrates a lack of support for employers. Nationwide, unemployment remains low at 3.8%. In my home state of Alabama, unemployment is significantly below the national average at only 3%. Businesses are struggling to find workers. The workforce shortage inflames the pressure of inflation and risk and a recession that would threaten the livelihoods of literally millions of Americans. Yet, I do not see policy and spending proposals from the administration that reflect the very realities that we face. The budget proposal fails to demonstrate industry-based partnerships that can address what employers say they need but can't find. Beyond the spending concerns, the regulatory agenda the department is pursuing is increasingly worrisome. A recently finalized rule regarding independent contractors threatens to disrupt millions of freelance and independent workers around the country, as well as businesses who rely on these workers. I would hope that the department will be supporting innovation, entrepreneurship, and those who choose to work in the growing freelance economy because of the flexibility it affords, rather than restricting opportunities for personal economic advancement. I'm also deeply concerned that the department's proposal to rewrite overtime regulations would further worsen the challenges faced by small businesses. It would destabilize the economy and reduce opportunities for career advancement. The Fair Labor Standards Act is the benchmark of the U.S. wage and hour law. Within this national framework, states may elect to implement overtime law and regulations that respond to their economic situation and the needs of their workers and their employers. The department's proposed regulation fails to recognize that the American economy is made up of many different local and regional economies. I find the administration's advancement of a one-size-fits-all regulatory agenda deeply concerning, given the potential to harm workers and small businesses, especially in the district I represent. The more than 417,000 small businesses in Alabama employ over 47% of private sector workers in our state. The Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy expressed concern that the department's regulatory analysis was insufficient and that it underestimated the economic impact of the rule on small businesses and nonprofit organizations, with potential negative consequences for employers such as loss of benefits and reduced worker flexibility. Madam Secretary, while the Department of Labor regulatory matters are frequently contentious, we have often been able to find bipartisan and common ground on skill training. Last year, I would have expressed my appreciation and support for the department's continued commitment to registered apprenticeship program. Unfortunately, earlier this year, the department that you're in charge of issued a proposal to reinvent the registered apprenticeship in a manner that would imperil the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship, an office that was created in 2019 and is the first new state apprenticeship agency in over 2 decades, with the specific goal of improving labor market participation through apprenticeship. Apprenticeship produces positive outcomes for workers and job seekers because it puts what should be the end goal of all workforce development programs, a job, first. These programs only exist where businesses choose to adopt this intensive approach to human capital management. We have seen support for these programs flourish under multiple administrations. The Alabama Office of Apprenticeship was in part created to respond to employer frustration with the Department of Labor's management of the registered apprenticeship program. These frustrations include a bureaucratic and outdated one-size-fits-all approach to skills training and overly prospective requirements. Employers across the country know that every industry and every employer cannot expect impartiality from the Department of Labor in reviewing apprenticeship program applications. The department's proposal would turn a 2-page law into a 776-page rule that would, in the name of equity and inclusion, reduce opportunities for American workers for all races and both sexes. I am concerned the department is more interested in catering to Beltway-based liberal social policy concerns rather than responding to the very real needs that real Americans deal with, whether they be workers, job seekers, or employers. What else could explain the department's publishing a regulation that it would eliminate the highly successful competency-based approach to apprenticeships, that would reduce the ability of states to recognize these programs or impose national testing requirements similar to the No Child Left Behind law that was repealed and replaced by Congress? Rather than replicating the failures of the Department of Education, we should be ensuring that American workers and job seekers have access to career pathways that work for them. Apprenticeships represent an opportunity and pathway to high-paying jobs. Unfortunately, the barriers to growth of this career training model will not be solved through funding alone. Improved program administration and more effective leadership at and by the department can better support the adoption of registered apprenticeships for workers for our nation's workforce. These are just some of the policy differences I am sure we will discuss today, and I'm sure they will come up in the questioning. I'm hopeful that as we work through this shortened budget year, that we'll be able to once again, at the end of the day, find some common ground. In closing, I do want to thank you, Acting Secretary, for appearing before us today, and look forward to your testimony and your continued work on our shared priorities, which I do believe that we can find quite a few of those. At this time, I'd like to recognize the ranking member of the committee, Ms. DeLaura, for her comments.
Thank you very much, Chairman Aderholt, for holding this hearing on the 2025 budget for the Department of Labor. Just before I make my comments, I do want to make a very quick comment about the issue of the high cost of grocery these days. And I think while we're making comments about inflation and the causes of inflation, and the causes of high price of groceries. We need to take a very hard look and investigate the price gouging that is being done by corporations, by the consolidation of the industry, which increases food prices. Shortage of food in the United States. That means that we do not have to raise food prices, but we need to take a hard look at the corporations who are raising the prices because they can. I think that should be a focus of our attention, and probably in this committee and in other committees as well, with the Federal Trade Commission and others. So I want to say a thank you to our witness, Acting Secretary Sue, for appearing today, for your many, many years of public service, for your dedication to protecting the rights of American workers. Though I must say I am perplexed by the acting prefix in your title. I will not pretend to understand why the Senate does what it does, but it is my hope you will be confirmed in the very near future. I've said this in other hearings with our secretaries in the last couple of weeks, but Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American woman elected to the House of Representatives, said once that public service is the rent you pay for space on this earth. And Secretary Sue, you have paid that rent many times over. You set an example for the rest of us by continuing to do so. I also want to say thank you to you for visiting my district, the 3rd District of Connecticut, earlier this year to celebrate a grant awarded in the 2023 bill that will boost Connecticut State Colleges and Universities system. You, like me, believe that our workforce is our infrastructure, and thus our current and future workforce is one of the best places for us to invest. When we think of the benefits that many of us might take for granted today, safer working conditions, paid leave, weekends, an 8-hour work day, and a 40-hour work week, we have to have the hard-fought victories of unions and the labor movement to thank for all of that. In recent years, workers have been organizing at a pace this country has not seen since the Great Depression. This is unequivocally a good thing. We all know that labor unions are the driving force for progress. The middle class is built on a union label. The fight for workers' rights has always had a special place in my heart. I am the daughter of a garment worker. My mother toiled in the old sweatshops in the city of New Haven, sewing shirt collars, piecework, and obtaining pennies on the dollar for that hard work. So every day now I work to ensure that her early struggles were not in vain. And when President Biden took office over 3 years ago, the economy was in crisis. Workers were struggling. Unemployment was over 6%. Millions of Americans were out of work. The economy has begun to make progress in giving workers a fighting chance, and that is thanks to President Biden and to you, Secretary Sue, to your leadership and the investments made by Democrats on the House Appropriations Committee. But the economy, as we all know, is still difficult for working people today, and we admit that. Too many families are weighed down by the high cost of living. They do live paycheck to paycheck. They struggle to make ends meet. And while unemployment is down, families are barely able to scrape by, and wages haven't gone up for these folks. But we have the largest corporations, the biggest corporations, who have reaped record profits. And I might add, 55 of these corporations pay no tax at all in the United States. Which is why your fiscal year 2025 budget request and your department's regulatory actions are so vital. I specifically commend your department's work to fight wage theft when employers fail to compensate workers for the wages they have earned. And through your independent contractor and overtime rules, you are putting desperately needed dollars back into the pockets of these workers. That addresses cost of living today. Unfortunately, many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to roll back these essential protections, but we cannot go backwards. The rollbacks they want would take earned wages away from American workers and their families, hurting their ability to pay their monthly bills and making the cost of living crisis even worse. And while it was a challenging process, I was proud to work with Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate to complete our work on the 2024 Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education Funding Bill. I am proud that we protected the investments this subcommittee made in job training, worker protection programs during the first 2 years of the Biden administration. Last year, House Republicans proposed a destructive cut of $4.7 billion to the Department of Labor. They proposed the elimination of Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We owe a job training programs, which would have denied opportunities and services for 420,000 youth and adults who face barriers to finding good-paying jobs. They would have eliminated Job Corps, which would have taken away vital training experiences for 50,000 young people. And they would have eliminated the Senior Community Employment Service Program and would have cut 40,000 community service positions for low-wage seniors. We spent months communicating the devastation this would bring to working people across the country, which is why I am so proud that we protected these programs and avoided the cuts to worker protection agencies like Wage and Hour and OSHA. We rejected dozens of poison pill policy riders proposed last year by the majority, including a new rider that would put workers at risk of being unlawfully misclassified as independent contractors. I am proud of where we ended up with the 2024 appropriations bills, but there are still unmet needs for workers, which brings me to the President's budget for 2025. The request for $14.2 billion for programs funded at the Department of Labor will help grow middle class, support working families, ensure America remains the land of opportunity for all her children. And while it is nice to see a modest increase to strengthening community college training grants, a program I created in my first year as chair of the Labor HHS Subcommittee, I believe there is much more we should do to boost this program. Community colleges are uniquely positioned to support local workforce development and industry needs. They are more accessible to more families, and they should be a focal point for our investment. And I am happy to see an increase of $50 million for registered apprenticeship programs. In addition, I am pleased to see a strong $35 million increase to the Wage and Hour Division to fight wage theft and to combat child labor. And I am glad that the President's budget once again calls for the establishment of a comprehensive paid family and medical leave program so that Americans can take up to 12 weeks of paid leave and do not have to make the impossible choice between providing for their families or taking care of the health of themselves or a loved one. I am also pleased that the President's budget calls on Congress to require employers to provide 7 paid sick days each year. I have fought tirelessly for paid leave and paid sick days in the Congress, and I look forward to working with the administration to make this a reality for American workers. It is a reality for members of Congress. They can take all the sick time that they need, all the paid leave that they can take, and what's good enough for members of Congress is good enough for the American people. In our recent hearing with HHS Secretary Javier Becerra, several members raised concern about the scourge of child labor and child trafficking. I noted that the Department of Labor has requested additional funding to investigate employers who prey on child labor, including in some of our most dangerous industries. Again, I strongly urge my colleagues to support the Department of Labor in its efforts to combat child labor and child trafficking and to penalize employers who profit by exploiting vulnerable children. Finally, I am thrilled to see a $46 million increase to the Bureau of International Labor Affairs, ILAB, so it can continue to effectively monitor and enforce the labor provisions of the United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement, the USMCA. Acting Secretary Sue, thank you for your commitment to workers, for ensuring that there is a pathway to good jobs and to the middle class, and for protecting the wages and benefits that workers have earned with their hard work. We have made great progress over the past 3 years, but there is still much to do, and I believe we have the opportunity before us to forge an even brighter future for the American labor movement and for hardworking Americans across this country. Thank you for being here this morning. I look forward to our discussion. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, we look forward to your testimony and, of course, your comments, and will be included fully in the record. So look forward to hearing your comments this morning. You have the mic.
Thank you so much, Chairman Aderholt. Chairman Aderholt, Ranking Member DeLauro, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of President Biden's fiscal year 2025 budget request for the Department of Labor. As the Acting Secretary of Labor, I get to travel the country to meet with workers. Workers like Mariah, a single mom who was living paycheck to paycheck, worried every day about how she would have enough to get by. She went to her local social services office to apply for SNAP benefits and Medicaid. That's where she noticed a flyer for a job training program in the pipe trades. Today, Mariah is in a good union job, and she has quadrupled her income. What struck me about Mariah was not just how much a good income meant to her. It was the pride she felt in putting in a hard day's work and getting rewarded for it, and the pride she saw in her children's eyes. It's undeniable. Good jobs change lives. This $13.9 billion request will help more people like Mariah get good jobs that can support families, lift up communities, and bring the dignity and pride that are core to the American dream. I want to frame our request under two priority areas. First, pathways to good jobs for all of America's workers. I've met with thousands of workers like Mariah who are in programs that work, programs that exist because we have invested in them. That's why we're requesting investments to develop and expand proven models to connect workers to the good jobs they want and need, and employers to the workers that they want and need. For example, we're requesting $8 billion for the Career Training Fund. That investment would help as many as 750,000 people who do not see four-year college as their path enroll in evidence-based, high-quality training programs for actual jobs in their communities. Workers who complete high-quality programs don't end up with a job search, they end up with a job. On that, we agree, Chairman. We also seek $335 million for apprenticeship programs. Registered apprenticeships provide training for the actual skills that employers need. They allow workers to earn while they learn, and they increase job pathways for underrepresented groups, including women, people of color, veterans, and individuals with disabilities. When I talk to business owners, many tell me that their top concern is recruiting and retaining workers. Well, the investments in our budget request are how Congress and the Department of Labor can tap into the talents and skills of all of America's workers and make sure that the supply of skilled workers meets the demand right now and well into the future. The second priority I'd like to highlight is the Department of Labor's mission to protect workers, including and especially those most vulnerable to exploitation. Too often, employers who hire 13-year-olds to work in hazardous conditions fail to pay workers overtime for a 60-hour work week, or who put workers at risk of losing their limbs or even their lives on the job, do it because they think they can get away with it, that no one will stop them, that they can operate in blatant disregard of the laws Congress has enacted. Not on our watch. That's why we're requesting modest but important increases for the department's worker protection agencies. Because we can't do this vital work without dedicated public servants, the wage and hour investigators who combat child labor, the team that ensures workplaces are free from safety hazards, the benefits advisors who answer the phone when panicked patients have been denied coverage for mental health services by their health insurance company. We're asking for $7.5 million for additional staff to combat wage theft and child labor, an additional $23 million to investigate high-hazard workplaces, protect whistleblowers, and give employers compliance assistance, and an additional $10.7 million for my solicitor's office, which has been essentially flat-funded for more than a decade. The President's request would also help us advance worker rights and promote a level playing field internationally for U.S. workers and businesses, and it would better support implementation of Congress's Secure 2.0 Act, the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, and the No Surprises Act, because when you pass laws, we should make them real. In all, the budget request will help make sure that workers can come home safe and healthy at the end of the workday and get high-quality jobs with the power to truly change lives. Again, I thank the subcommittee, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you for your comments and overview, and we will start our questioning time. Obviously, as we normally do, 5 minutes per person, and we look forward to your responses to our questions. Let me begin. Last year, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs rescinded a rule that provided clarity and certainty around religious exemptions. Those were for organizations that contract with the federal government. The rule allowed religious organizations to operate according to their religious beliefs while participating as federal contractors. Now that the rule is rescinded, what steps has the department taken to ensure that religious organizations will receive fair treatment and protection in the federal contracting process?
So, Chairman Aderholt, the religious exemption does remain in place. We believe that nobody should have to choose between their religion and their ability to operate a business, and that they should still be in compliance with laws that protect against discrimination. So the religious exemption order is still in place. Our final rule on that you mentioned actually reestablished OFCCP's long-established policy that was in place under both Republican and Democratic administrations that analyzes a contractor's exemption claims on a case-by-case basis, and it's consistent with the views of both DOJ and the EEOC as well as the courts. I might also mention that while the previous administration's rule was in place, only one business received an exemption, and since the rule was rescinded, we've had no contractors that have requested such an exemption.
Okay. Your FY 2025 budget request included a 22% increase for the Department of Civil Rights Center. Can you talk a little bit about the activities by this center thus far in FY 2024 that's related to religious rights of DOL employees and program participants?
Thank you very much for that question, Chairman. So, in general, what that center does is it makes sure that that both we are in compliance and they conduct investigations. One of the things that I believe is also in our budget request is making sure that we are providing services to all workers, and part of that is ensuring language access for individuals who need translated services. That's one of the areas of focus, and we have a language access center as part of that area as work. But the other thing is that we do investigate if there are complaints that are made internally. That is part of the work also of our internal Office of Civil Rights.
And let me switch gears to the Regulatory Flexibility Act, which requires federal agencies, as you know, to consider the effects of regulations on small businesses and other small entities by performing initial regulatory flexibility analysis. As I mentioned in my opening statement, small businesses provide essential job opportunities to the constituents I represent, and regulatory action taken by the department without consideration of their effects on these entities unfairly harms, in my opinion, rural Americans especially. When considering the potential regulatory actions, what steps does the department take, number one, to meet the requirements of the Regulatory Flexibility Act? And number two, ensure that proposals developed in Washington take into consideration their effect on small businesses, especially in rural America?
So, Chairman, you might be referring to, there is a provision that requires when OSHA adopts laws to go through a small business review. And that is very important because what you are saying is true. We do take and must take great care to make sure that the rules that we put in place have the impact that is intended and don't have negative unintended impacts. And that is why, many people complain that our rulemaking process takes too long. Part of that is because we do go through a very careful review that includes small businesses. And so for some of the rules that are pending, we have completed that small business review. For others that are upcoming, we will obviously comply with that. The other is that even outside of the OSHA space, we engage with, we listen to, beyond just the regular public comment period, which is also a time in which we hear the kinds of comments that you were talking about, but we do reach out to small businesses, we do listening sessions, we invite input, we take all of those things very seriously because as you have mentioned, small businesses are really the engines of our economy. I know that because my parents had small businesses. We have to make sure that we understand the impact of any of our rulemaking on all affected stakeholders.
Thank you. Ms. Doral.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Sue, in your testimony, you clearly state, quote, "The department is committed to combating illegal child labor because we cannot build our economy on the backs of children," end quote. First of all, thank you for your moral clarity and for unwavering focus to keep kids safe from harm in dangerous workplaces. 2023, your department investigated 955 cases of child labor violations. It involved almost 5,800 children nationwide. Just last month, you cracked down on a parts supplier for John Deere that relied on children as young as 14 to conduct dangerous work. The department's work is outstanding. We need much more of it, which is why I believe the Wage and Hour Division and the solicitor need far more resources to continue going after companies that exploit vulnerable children. How would additional resources for Wage and Hour and the solicitor expand the department's efforts to combat child labor? Can you explain why securing penalties and judgments against offending employers is so resource intensive?
Thank you so much, Ranking Member, for your moral clarity as well. We are seeing really unconscionable cases of child labor. We are seeing 13-year-olds working the night shift on the kill floor of meatpacking plants, working with toxic chemicals, doing cleaning. We see young people working as sawmill operators, doing roofing, work that is understandably by law illegal for children to work in. We are not talking about a child who is working at the corner store, learning how to show up on time and provide good customer service and the importance of responsibility and a paycheck. We're really seeing terrible cases in which children are being put in harm's way. Our job is, one of our most important jobs is to put a stop to such child labor, to investigate, and our budget request includes $7.5 million specifically for child labor to increase the number of boots on the ground, to increase the number of investigators in the field who can investigate these cases. Usually involve employers who don't want to be discovered. They don't want people to know what is happening. And so it requires us to be innovative. It requires us to be smart. It requires us to ask the right questions. And oftentimes this happens because the location where the work is being done is not the direct hirer of the children. They often hire through a contractor, which creates other vulnerabilities. And so our investigations involve understanding who's responsible, what the right penalty should be, and include using tools that Congress has given us, like the hot goods provision.
I just will say about that, we need to give you the resources to crack down on companies that exploit children. Let's not mince words. In my part, we need to shut companies down that exploit child labor, and we need to send those responsible to prison. Let me just ask you about low salary thresholds. Because of these low salary thresholds for overtime eligibility under outdated regulations, employers have been strategically misclassifying their employees as, quote, managers in order to avoid paying overtime. This is wage theft, plain and simple. A recently published study found that giving workers these inflated job titles results in 13% less pay or a loss of $4 billion in overtime payments each year. By raising the overtime threshold, how would a revised regulation help to prevent this kind of grand-scale wage theft from low-wage workers that's happening across the country in a wide range of industries?
Yes, thank you so much, Ranking Member. Our wage and hour investigations find that overtime violations are some of the most common that we see. And as you noted, overtime violations deny workers a just day's pay. It's one of the fundamental promises in the Fair Labor Standards Act that when you work longer hours, you will be paid for it. And that form of misclassification, giving someone a title but their work is still very much the work of a frontline employee in order to avoid paying is a real problem. That is one of the reasons why we have engaged in a rulemaking process because titles shouldn't be used to obscure what workers are really doing, and the salary test is one part of helping to ensure that workers who are entitled to overtime get overtime. And so it is just an important, very important piece of ensuring that workers who go to work each day get the wages that they have earned in their pockets.
Okay. What's interesting is just a news article that talked about so it's on CBS. Would you rather be a front desk clerk or a, quote, director of first impressions? I think that really is carrying this to a different level. So we know how they're trying to circumvent the overtime rules, and it's wage theft. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Madam Secretary, for being here today and speaking with me yesterday. I brought up a couple of the issues yesterday, and we talked a little bit about the H-2B visa program. I appreciate that things are being expedited. I still think there's room for over about 4,000 additional visas this year, as we spoke about yesterday, and maybe you can follow up with that and just see if there's any way we can get a few more visas released. With regard to H-2B visas, the lottery system is a real problem because, you pick winners and losers. I mean, if somebody comes up as a loser 2 years in a row or 3 years in a row and they depend on these H-2B workers, they will go out of business. They have in my district. So I will ask you, and again, we'll follow up later, about whether or not you could, in fact, go to eliminate the lottery system, go to a proportional or where a certain proportion of eligible applications get filled for an employer instead of all or none, because I think that would help with these, especially as you pointed out yesterday in our conversation, with the increase in applications. This becomes even more important that we perhaps go to some proportional system, and you'll have to get back to me whether or not that can be statutorily done. With regards to the No Surprises Act implementation for on ERISA plans, there is still an issue with insurance companies not having timely payments to providers. They're supposed to pay within 30 days, less than a third pay on time, and again, you'll have to get back to me as to whether or not the department, if they just need more resources to enforce this with the insurers. We kind of solved the problem for the patients, but we kind of put it on the backs of the providers now, instead of the insurance companies, where part of that burden should reside. But let me talk about a couple of other issues. Look, I'm sorry that there's bipartisan opposition to your confirmation in the Senate, but it is bipartisan. And again, we don't deal with Senate politics, but I'm glad that we have a functioning acting secretary, because the Labor Department does important things. There was criticism from the other side over attempts to rein in government spending. You're aware we have over $2 trillion deficit this year, $34 trillion federal debt. And I'm still waiting to hear, other than tax increases, what's a possible way out. And Madam Secretary, you know as well as I do that the President's budget, despite almost $6 trillion in tax increases, still keeps that deficit going. So, if the other side wants to recommend how we deal with it, I'm all ears. But just criticizing our attempts at fiscal responsibility, I don't think is responsible, to be honest with you. But what I want to concentrate on in the last couple minutes is, what is the Department of Labor doing? Because I think you'll agree with me that wage growth has not kept pace with inflation. I mean, that's just a fact, and we have a lot of data points to show that. And I believe that part of it is that we have 9 million working age people who crossed the border illegally in the past few years. I've got to believe they've entered the job market, sometimes legally, sometimes not, and that's suppressing wages. What is the department doing to help the American worker from that border invasion that has resulted in almost 10 million workers entering this country who, you and I both know, probably get paid a little less than an American union worker and depress wages overall?
Thank you, Dr. Harris. I did very much enjoy our conversation yesterday, and there are many issues that I feel like we could work on together. I want to just acknowledge the H-2B issue. I know it's important, and businesses should not be going out of business because they can't get the workers that they need. That is why we have taken a hard look at what our Office of Foreign Labor certification is doing to try to speed up while maintaining integrity of that system. As you acknowledge, the number of applications that we have received has really skyrocketed. In the first 3 days of January, we got more applications than four times more than the cap. And so just acknowledging that, that I look forward to working with you and on sharing whatever we have done to try to make it better, but also you mentioned the potential for statutory improvements. I hear this from many of the members of your body, and I would love to make sure that we're doing what we need to do there so that employers can meet their workforce need. Also appreciate, I know you have probably a particular expertise in the No Surprises Act and why it's so important, and we do enforcement in that space, but also look forward to a conversation about what we might need to do to ensure that that those who should be paying are actually paying at the same time that we protect patients. On the just one thing on the budget itself. So our proposal is a 4% increase over the FY24 enacted. It also stays within the Fiscal Responsibility Act cap. And so I appreciate your point about we are in a place of making difficult choices, and I believe that the department, we have done that. Some of what you are hoping for would require us to have more resources, which was why we've asked for them, including in the H-2B space. The last thing is I would say, the data about where we are in the economy is that wage growth has actually outpaced the rate of inflation. This is especially true for low and middle income workers. I'm not saying that everything is great. I'm not saying that everyone is doing right. There are still too many people, as the ranking member said, who live paycheck to paycheck, who struggle. That's the work of all of us to do everything we can with the powers that we have to try to alleviate some of that suffering. But real wages are up, and that means more wages in workers' pockets. That means more breathing room, as the president likes to say, for working families. And I think one of the solutions to what you raise is that if we create a pie that's big enough for everybody, then we can see good job opportunities for all. And that is what we have seen since President Biden came into office. We've had 15.2 million jobs created. We have historically low unemployment. The chairman mentioned this in his state. It's been under 4% for 26 months straight. That's not been true since the 1970s. And labor force participation is high. So it's not that the unemployment rate is low because people aren't working. People are coming into labor market, they're looking for jobs, and they're finding jobs. And so when you have strong GDP growth, steady jobs growth, and you invest in policies that help working families, we create a bigger pie in this country, and that's the president's vision. I share that vision, and I know that there are areas that we can work on together to pursue that vision.
Thank you. Yield back.
Ms. Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Madam Secretary. Let me first say thank you very much for your tremendous leadership, Acting Secretary, Madam Secretary. Thank you. Wanted to ask you a couple of things about what you're doing to promote job quality and pathways to good jobs for all workers, especially historically underrepresented workers that tend to be from communities of color. I'm happy that the department's request, you include $5 million for the Women in Apprenticeship and Non-Traditional Occupations Grant Program. Now, in June of 2023, Black women over the age of 20 had an unemployment rate of 5.4%, which is higher than white women at 2.6%, AAPI women at 3.2%, and Latinas at 4.1%. Of course, this is very concerning to hear. We know that Black women have also been disproportionately impacted by the lingering impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic. And so wanted to find out what actions are you taking in the Department of Labor to really address job access disparities impacting women of color in general and African-American women in specific, or Black women in specifics.
Thank you, Congresswoman. This is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart. This is something that we have to get right. When the president says that we are going to build an economy from the middle out and the bottom up that leaves no one behind, he knows and I know that we have to be clear-eyed about who has been left behind for too long in the past. Our budget includes investments in workforce training programs that are creating opportunity in communities across the country. I mentioned the historic job growth, and these are opportunities for people who want to work, who have talent and potential and the desire to be in a training program and want nothing more than their shot at their piece of the American dream. And so we need to do everything we can to break down systemic barriers that have existed for too long. Some of those are because of bias and discrimination. Some of those exist because of occupational segregation. We have seen that too often, Black workers are relegated to jobs that have lower job quality and lower pay. And then, because of our lack of valuing their work, that becomes justified in that industry. We have to do better than that. The care industry is a good example of that. Our programs, so what are we doing about it? Our programs include, as you mentioned, WANTO. It's the Women in Apprenticeships and Non-Traditional Occupations Grant. We are seeking an increase in order to use proven models. That we see across the country that there are women, like I mentioned Mariah, but there's thousands others who are in programs that will allow them to do work that maybe they didn't know existed before, or maybe they didn't even imagine for themselves. But oftentimes, as we know, when someone is in there, others can see that they can do it too. And so we're investing in programs. There are programs also that are led by Black women, Black tradeswomen in particular. So we have an investment in a group called Chicago Women in Trades that has demonstrating how when you give Black women a chance, they can do any trade, any job, but a trades job that has a square path to the middle class. We also invested in their scaling their model toward others. The last thing I'll mention is, I know we talked about this, Congresswoman, but we have something called mega projects at the Department of Labor. That is an effort to take construction projects of $35 million or more and provide assistance from the beginning. Now, the chairman said, not everything is a federal solution, and we agree with that. So the question is, how can the federal government help to advance our goals of a strong economy, good jobs for all, and equity? What we're doing in this space is assisting project owners, contractors, and subcontractors before a single shovel even hits the ground to make sure that they are getting the workforce that they need and tapping into every community for that. So it's about recruitment policies. It's about outreach to make sure people know that there are jobs. And we're doing that in a way that's very intentional about leaving no one behind.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary, because this whole issue of equity, it has many, many layers, and I'm glad to see that you all have looked at this and advancing through executive orders also equity in contracting, which is extremely important for minority and women-owned businesses. Also, very quickly, in terms of professions and workers who are working outdoors, given the fire dangers now, especially in California, OSHA, trying to figure out how OSHA helps protect workers outside from these harmful effects of climate change. And we talked a little bit about the bill that I have, the Smoke Act. But are you, and Mr. Chairman, do I have another 30 seconds
Go ahead,
on
go
this?
ahead.
Just want to raise the increased funds to use to protect outside workers, like construction workers and longshoremen, people who are impacted by the effects of climate. What are we doing to protect them? And if you can look at this more closely.
Absolutely, Congresswoman. Very, very much eager to work with you on this to see what we can do. There is not a federal standard on smoke, but as you know, the General Duties Clause applies to all employers and who are covered by the OSH Act, and we have to do everything we can to keep workers safe, including from outdoor hazards. We are currently working on, as I think this you all know, the first federal standard ever to combat the hazards of heat. So very much aware that, and that's both an outdoor and an indoor potential hazard, but very much aware of the need to protect workers against outdoor issues, and happy to work with you on what we can do.
Thank you.
Mr. Muhlenar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Madam Secretary. Food production, production agriculture is vital for our country. It's vital for Michigan and for my constituents. You talked about earlier about the economic engine, small businesses. In rural America, agriculture is the economic engine, and these family farmers are vital. Many of the farmers, the small farm operators in my district, use the H-2A program. Are you familiar with that program? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Unfortunately, the Department of Labor continues to hurt the work they do to feed Michigan and our country. For 10 straight years, the department has mandated adverse effect wage rate increases that outpace inflation. I'm hearing from fifth and sixth generation farmers that they may only have 1 or 2 years left before they are forced to leave the business. Even H-2A workers are concerned about the increases because they know their job will be lost if the farm goes out of business. That's why I introduced the Supporting Farm Operations Act to pause the AWR increases and help these farms stay open. While this wage freeze would give farmers some sense of stability, there's also the problem with the flawed methodology used to calculate AWR. Madam Secretary, I noticed in your remarks you didn't mention meeting with small farm operators. Have you met with farmers about this issue?
Thank you, Congressman. I want to acknowledge the importance of the program. I have certainly heard from many about why why the H-2A program is so important for them to meet their workforce needs. Part of the H-2A program is to make sure that H-2A workers do not undercut the ability for workers in the United States already to do the jobs and to be paid a
I'm
wage.
familiar with the program, and I think there are good safeguards to ensure that we aren't in any way forcing Americans out of jobs. But this is a matter of the Biden administration raising the costs on these family farmers to the point where these mandated Department of Labor increases are at risk of putting them out of business. And so I'm wondering if you've heard about that concern.
Yes. As you know, the department has completed a rule on that, and so as with all of our rules, we invite, seek out, and take input. So yes, I mean it is a space in which, as you say, we both need to help employers meet their workforce needs and we need to ensure that the safeguards that are in place.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, but I guess my question is, there are negative consequences to that rule, forcing family farms out of business. And my question is, are these intended consequences or unintended consequences with this policy? Because what I'm hearing you say is you've heard the message and you're not concerned about it.
Well, Congressman, I've also met with some of your colleagues about this, and I want to make the same offer to you, which is I'm happy to have my team come and talk to farmers who are affected by this to understand the impact of the rule. The rule that we did actually affected a very narrow, it was a very narrow part of how AWR is used.
Well, let me just say,
Yeah.
in my district, it is having a huge effect when it comes to
Yeah.
people growing cherries, apples, asparagus, carrots. I mean, across the board, people growing fruit and vegetables are affected by this, and they need desperate relief. I guess the question is, could you actually on your own pause this increase to give them some time to get back on their feet?
Let me say this, Congressman. I am happy to have our staff work together on what they need, and in addition to what I responded to earlier with the chairman's question about how we engage with small businesses, including small farms, and any rules that affect them
I'll
at the
take you
front
up on
end.
that.
We also do compliance assistance
Okay.
across all of our agencies,
I'll take-
and this might be an area where that could be helpful.
Well, I'll take you up on that. I guess one last question. Secretary Vilsack claimed that the Farm Labor Survey is an accurate and appropriate vehicle to set the AWAR. Your own Bureau of Labor Statistics data show that in Michigan, the general farm worker wage is $2 less than the Farm Labor Survey rate. How do you explain setting the AWAR based on the agriculture, the Farm Labor Survey, when your own data show that it's $2 left?
Well, so Congressman, I have tremendous respect, obviously, for my colleague, Secretary Vilsack, and it is true that our AWR is based on their survey. My understanding of how H2A, the H2A guardrails is that we have to ensure that an H2A wage is not less than, not just the AWR, but other, the prevailing wage, a collective bargained wage. There are, the federal minimum wage. So it's the highest of those things.
Mr. Chairman, just one last question.
Yep, real quick.
All right. Well, just so you're aware, in Michigan, it's $18.50 an hour, which is vastly above any of the rates you were talking about. Often housing is provided and transportation is provided. So in my view, that far exceeds anything that you're comparing it to.
I'm very happy to follow up with you on this, Congressman.
Thank you.
Mr. Pocan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. And thank you, Madam Secretary. I want to acknowledge the remarks that Rosa made as well about, your secretary, Sue, period. And you've been doing outstanding work and working with business and workers and doing, I think, a really great balance with your department. And I just want to thank you for all that work. As you know, we're kind of in an interesting point where the amount of unionization is at an all-time, I think, high. At least the public opinion on unions is about highest in 50 years. But we're seeing people organizing in areas that we've never seen organized before. In your budget, there's a slight increase to your Office of Labor Management Standards, which helps protect union members and their right to organize. I have two questions. First, given the significant rise in unionization over the last year, is this funding sufficient to meet the needs of workers nationwide? And then also, I know it's an independent agency, but the National Labor Relations Board, many of us have advocated for a much stronger increase, and they're still kind of chronically underfunded, leading to significant drops in staffing nationwide. And how can we continue to protect workers from unfair labor practices with all this unionization and support the NLRB, a vital independent agency that safeguards employees' rights to seek better working conditions?
Thank you very much, Congressman Pocan. Yes, we have seen historic levels of organizing in this country, and we have seen really historic gains at the bargaining table for workers represented by unions. We are also seeing, as has long been the case, that when that happens, there are benefits not just for the members of that union, but for wages in that industry. And that is very much a key tenet of President Biden's vision of a strong economy. To your point, there were about 400,000 workers who joined unions in 2023. And to Congresswoman Lee's question earlier, 65% of them were Black. And so we also know that unions have been a pathway to the middle class for all workers, but has been very important as a way to combat racial inequity in wages. Our OLMS, as you mentioned, Congressman, has a role to play. Part of what we do is investigate to make sure that union elections are held according to the law. That is something that we take very seriously. And another is that on a form called the LM10, employers who engage in certain practices that would be seen as dissuading their workers from joining unions have to report this activity to us. So we have done some work to try to make that easier. We've updated the form, and we also take that work very, very seriously. As you acknowledge, the NLRB is a separate body, so I won't speak to that work, except to say that we do believe that the right of a worker to choose whether or not to join a union belongs entirely to that worker, full stop.
Great. Thank you. And then I just want to talk a little more about child labor protections. You know, we've seen a number of states introduce legislation and pass legislation that's kind of rolled back protections, waiving work permit requirements, including in my own state. Things have been proposed to allow 14 and 15-year-olds to be able to work, and in many cases, as you said, hazardous or exploitative sort of circumstances. With the budget that you have proposed, do you think that you can adequately address what's happening in the states, given there's so many laws passing that are, I would say, weakening standards on child safety?
I mean, I really appreciate, there is no one who would like to see truly sufficient resources to combat the scourge of child labor in this country than me. Our request, it's $7.5 million for child labor to our wage and hour division, is very much intended to make a real make real progress in building those resources, and to be respectful of the Fiscal Responsibility Act and the caps that were in place. It is true that while some states are increasing protections, they see what's going on, they don't want to see children working in hazardous conditions, getting injured on the job, falling off of rooftops and dying, working with hazardous chemicals, working with dangerous equipment, and they're increasing their own penalties. There are also some states, as you know, that are doing the opposite. One important message is that federal law does apply regardless, right? The federal law is a floor, and we make sure that the Department of Labor enforces that floor, so that children, regardless of the state protections, understand that there's a floor beneath which nobody should have to live and work, and that's the federal standard. But we also have tried to improve our working in partnership with state and local enforcement agencies. So in states where there are higher protections, we really defer to the work that they do in order to allow our resources to be really utilized where the Department of Labor is truly the first and last line of defense for vulnerable individuals.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Mr. Clyde.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Aderholt. Acting Secretary Sue, in the last 3 years, Americans have experienced sky-high inflation. Our national debt has continued to climb as a result of the Biden administration's failed policies. Moreover, our nation is facing a serious labor shortage across the board, from the healthcare sector to childcare services to various skilled positions. So I think it's more important than ever that we eliminate unnecessary barriers and red tape for our labor force to ensure that employers, especially small businesses, are able to find the employees that they need. Yet despite this labor shortage, the Department of Labor continues to push dangerous rules that will destroy businesses across our country. Hardworking Americans have become increasingly wary of the Department of Labor's authoritarian legislating through rulemaking. The National Labor Relations Board rule, Standards for Determining Joint Employer Status, published on October the 27th last year, and the Wage and Hour Divisions rule, Employee or Independent Contractor Classification under the Fair Labor Standards Act, published on January 10th of this year, are two such rules. While I'm relieved that both the House and the Senate have passed a Congressional Review Act resolution disapproving of the joint employer rule, threats from the White House to veto the CRA are extremely concerning. Furthermore, knowing that a U.S. district judge in Texas has already vacated the rule on March the 8th of this year, I urge your department not to pursue further action on this matter. This rule, if allowed to go into effect, will devastate small business franchises and entrepreneurs by placing unnecessary and burdensome requirements on mom-and-pop shops. These businesses should have the autonomy to determine their own hiring practices, wages, and benefits in compliance with current federal law. They often lack the financial and administrative means to satisfy labor union demands. Yet your department would place legal liability on these small businesses to do just that. If that were not enough of a blow to our economy, your department's also pursuing the independent contractor rule, which would upend the concept of independent contractor work, exposing businesses to additional legal liability and limiting opportunities for individuals to work as independent contractors. Whether it is a full-time profession, a second job, or part-time work, roughly 45% of the American workforce are pursuing employment as independent contractors to keep food on their tables and provide for their families. These workers choose an independent contractor status because of the flexibility and the autonomy it provides, allowing them to determine when and with whom they do business. Those contracts between businesses and independent contractors are agreed to by both parties, and it is far beyond the Department of Labor's reach or authority to intervene in these private business dealings. By making it harder for individuals to qualify as independent contractors, the Department of Labor is placing additional liability on business, resulting in fewer contract opportunities for independent workers and a slower, more tedious hiring process. Acting Secretary Sue, independent contractor work is a cornerstone of the American economy. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
It's composed of more than 72 million Americans. In light of the devastating effects your rule will have on these workers, what is the Department of Labor doing to ensure that Americans can continue to work as independent contractors?
Thank you very much, Congressman. And I appreciated you taking a moment for us to chat yesterday before this hearing. So let me answer the various issues that you raised. The first is, I know you know, but to be clear, the NLRB is an entirely separate entity, and while I have tremendous respect for them, the joint employer rule was not put out by the Department of Labor, and we did not play any role in the joint employer rule. To the point of the independent contractor rule, which was ours, I do agree that independent contractors play an extremely important role in our economy, and our rule does not affect that. Bona fide, true independent contracting is, it's a way that people make a living. It's the way that they put their expertise into developing, their own independent business operation, and then they get hired to do that. That remains in place.
Okay, well, then let me ask you this.
Okay.
Did your department conduct any studies in order to determine the economic impact if millions of workers can no longer qualify as independent contractors?
So what our independent contractor rule did was bring the test back to be aligned with decades of federal case law on this. We didn't make up the test. The test comes from cases that have interpreted how to decide whether somebody is an employee or an independent contractor under the Fair Labor Standards Act that have been decided, again, for a very, very long time. And we did engage with, as we would do with all of our rulemaking. I think we had something over 30,000 comments on that rule, and we, of course, review them all. We respond to them all. Our goal, really, Congressman, was to make sure that somebody who should be an employee and therefore should enjoy all the protections of a century's worth of labor law protections, like minimum wage, like the right to overtime, like
I get
unemployment
that, I
insurance.
get that. But what I see is that what you are doing is you're putting a federal foot on the ability of people to be an independent contractor. And I don't see that. I know I'm over my time. I have one more quick question, if I may. Okay, all right. You're asking for $8 billion here on a new federal program. We are $34 trillion in debt. How can you do that? I mean, how is this a federal authority? Where is it in the Constitution that you're going to spend another $8 billion?
Well, it's a request, and I'm here to make a case for our requests. This is really very much a part of, and we've heard some of this theme already, employers want and need workers with the right skills for the jobs that they are creating. And working people, job seekers, want good jobs in their communities. And what part of the Department of Labor's role is to try to create the connections.
I agree, but I think that's a state responsibility, not a federal responsibility, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, welcome. Thank you, Madam Secretary, and I applaud the good work of your department and your team. And I've heard some concern from my friends over on the other side of the aisle about inflation, about regulations, so I'm just going to give you my little point of view here. What I'm concerned about, what I think a lot of people are concerned about, is a trend for women being driven out of the workforce. Why? What's happening? First of all, I use my triple my. Women, there are 25 million women in this country. I know this is not your department issue, but there are 25 million women in this country of reproductive age who now live in states where abortion is banned or severely restricted. You know what that means? That means there are going to be potentially thousands and thousands of women who have forced pregnancies, which means many of those women are going to be forced out of the labor market. And you want to talk about inflation? We're going to talk about the costs rising for those families. Number two, the cost of child care and long-term care are rising. The centers are closing all over the country. I have two little toddler grandchildren. I just spent my week off trying to find child care for them this summer. It's very, very difficult all over this country. And also not having paid leave, medical leave policies, also driving women out of the country, may drive them out of the country, out of the workforce. When you compare us to like countries, I saw a report from the Labor Department that this is costing our economy billions of dollars. I think it was something like $700 billion. So my first question to you, and then let me just add something else. You know what's that called, adding insult to injury? Adding insult to injury, last year, the Republican majority proposed an appropriation bill that completely eliminated the Women's Bureau. So first question, why is it important to have a dedicated Women's Bureau at the Labor Department?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. I mean, I think in much of what you said, you provided the answer. We have seen women come back into the workforce after COVID in record numbers. And we certainly saw how women in particular, but obviously everybody was devastated by the economic impacts of the pandemic. Just to your point about childcare, we know that when we make the right investments, it works. So under the American Rescue Plan Act, the investments in childcare allowed some 225,000 childcare centers to stay open. At the same time, it allowed increase in childcare workers' wages, right? The president believes, as do I know you do as well, that we should not have to choose between reliable, accessible, affordable childcare and the well-being of childcare givers, that those two things, we can uplift them at the same time. Our Women's Bureau has done a study, two I'll mention. One is the National Database of Childcare Prices. It shows just how much childcare costs at a very granular level. I think it's down to by county or district, but it's really indicating just how untenable it is to not have a childcare infrastructure that can support all individuals, but because those responsibilities still primarily fall to women, women workers. The other is the study that you mentioned, which is that if we invested in childcare in this country and other family supporting policies the way comparable industrial countries do, like Germany and Canada, we would allow some 5 million more women to join the workplace and a workforce, and that would result in $775 million of economic activity a year. So I know the conversation's often about how can we afford to do this. I think the real question is how can we afford not to do it?
Thank you. You talked about apprentice programs or uplifting jobs. There are a lot of jobs that women have that we need, especially in the care industry. What, if anything, you're doing to try to make sure that those workers are getting the salaries they need to take care of their own families?
Yeah, that's right. So, so this is a whole of government issue, and many agencies are hard at work on this. The president issued an executive order on increasing access to care and supporting caregivers. The Department of Labor has some work in that space, including samples that we created so that workers who work in people's homes, whether as nannies or caregivers or housekeepers, can actually have an agreement with their employer to set out rights, responsibilities, expectations, and the like. The other thing that I will mention is this kind of relates to Chairman your point about the sector grants. Is there are industries in which employers say they really, really need workers. Childcare is one of them. Healthcare is another. Education is a third. And so when we talk about apprenticeship programs and training programs, we often focus on the trades. That makes sense because the trades are the gold standard when it comes to apprenticeship programs. But these training programs, tried and true, also work in other industries. So we've invested in other sectors. Childcare is one of them. Teaching is another. We now have apprenticeships in industries that didn't exist before.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Always pleased to follow my colleague from Florida as well. I'm sure all of my colleagues here can testify to the fact that our nation is experiencing a workforce crisis that our current system is not adequately addressing. I hardly take a meeting with Kansas employers where they don't share about struggles to close the skills gap and find workers to meet the needs of their business. Given the current status of our labor force, I have serious reservations about the proposed rule that your department has put forward under the National Apprenticeship Act. I would specifically like to discuss a provision that would strip state apprenticeship agencies of the ability to recognize suitable occupations for apprenticeships and centralize this authority with DOL's Office of Apprenticeship, completely undermining state autonomy and almost certainly leading to a disconnect between local labor markets and the needs for apprenticeship opportunities. While I understand you cannot answer proposed questions on the regulation, employers have significant concerns that under the current system, the Department of Labor is already not a neutral arbiter when it comes to reviewing and approving apprenticeship applications. Can you please share the number of requests for a new apprenticeable industry and the average time it took the department to approve the request?
Thank you, Congressman. I've heard this now a couple times about neutral arbiter, so I do want to say that our approach to workforce development overall, but definitely apprenticeships, is that they have to be demand-driven. They have to be tied to the needs of employers. It just doesn't make sense to train for skills or skills that are not needed or jobs that don't exist. That is one reason why registered apprenticeships are so invaluable is that they engage employers on their needs. There's clarity about what the skills are needed, how they are going to be acquired, and then individuals can earn while they learn. Right? I talk to lots of people who would love to go into a training program to get a better skill and to get a better job and to be able to afford more of the basics of life, but they can't do that because they have bills to pay. They have a job they're currently in.
For the applications the department did not grant, can you please share some examples of why the department reached that decision?
So I don't know about anything specific, a specific situation, but I will say that one reason why registered apprenticeships are so valued is that they do have real standards built into them. And it's standards not only for the training, but also standards for the job. They include, there's a job quality component to it, wages, wage progression, the opportunity to move up. There's also—
I have very limited time. I have to move on, but I would love to talk offline about that. In much of my district, agriculture and ag-adjacent industries comprise a large portion of the workforce in the state's economy. Across Kansas, farmers experience challenges in securing a consistent workforce, and many utilize the H-2A program. I already hear from farmers across my district of the complexity of the applications, especially when employers utilize the program. They must interact separately with multiple different government agencies who are slow to process applications and delay decisions on whether an employer may proceed with the hiring process. The Department of Labor's changes to the program wage methodology through drastic increases in the adverse effect wage rate and changes to occupational classification codes have created more uncertainty for producers in my district who are forced to absorb the cost of the rulemaking. In many cases, due to either the cost of the program or delays in processing, those jobs have remained unfilled. When you responded to Congressman Molinaro's question about the impacts of the H-2A changes on small and mid-sized farms, you mentioned that the department helps with rule compliance. How does the compliance with new wage requirements help producers for whom the program has become unaffordable?
Thank you, Congressman. I mean, as I discussed with Congressman Molinar, the H-2A program is a balance of meeting the needs of employers and ensuring protections, not just for the H-2A worker, but for US-based workers, right? There are requirements around recruitment, and part of that is the wage protection that we don't want. I mean, this is by Congress, so you don't want, but I also don't want a workforce that is more vulnerable and that brings down the wages in an industry in which it could be a job that somebody in the U.S. wants to do. For example, we had a complaint involving H-2A farmers, farmers who were using the H-2A program to bring in workers and purposely not hiring black farm workers in Mississippi. We don't want a program that will undercut the ability of U.S. workers to have a good job.
We also don't want the compliance to be such that folks can no longer afford it. Forgive me for going over. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Watson-Coleman.
To have regarding all the good work that I believe this administration and your department have been dedicated to. Excuse me. All good intentions don't lead to all good outcomes, and so I want to kind of talk to you about that a little bit. The projects that are funded through the bipartisan infrastructure plan were devised to provide good jobs, repairs that needed to be made, increased diversity, increased training, and all those kinds of things, be it contractors or employees. I have a question about, does the department have the resources to ensure that those priorities are actually taking place? What accountability is there to certify that workforce diversity goals are being met for federally contracted projects? who keeps that information? Is it in any way available for us to evaluate? Because at the end of the day, I want to make sure that the diversity proposals and promises actually came through for underserved communities, particularly minorities and women.
Thank you, Congresswoman. As I said, this is something that's very important to me and to the department as well. We can't build an economy that leaves no one behind if we are not honest about who is being left behind. As you note, the historic investments being made right now in our country is about repairing roads and making sure there's safe bridges. It's about making sure that every family who turns on the faucet gets clean drinking water. It's about ensuring that every community has access to high-speed, reliable, affordable internet. And all of those are opportunities to create good jobs in the communities that need them the most. And so as we put shovels in the ground, right, as we replace lead pipes, we also have to be sure that those jobs are available to every single community. One way of doing that, one policy mechanism, is to have local hire provisions when it comes to contractors who receive federal funds. My sister agencies who are putting out the money do have mechanisms for reporting on how those projects are going. We similarly, I mentioned earlier in response to Congresswoman Lee's question, we have a mega project effort which is designed to help employers make sure that they know where ready talent is. Right? I mean, everybody has correctly noted the challenge of employers in finding workers. Well, there is a lot of untapped talent in this country. There's a tremendous amount of potential, and this is our moment to make sure that they enjoy all of the same opportunities that we are creating in communities across America, and that is how we build more pathways to the middle class. That is how we ensure.
Can I respectfully interrupt you?
Of course, please.
Because I agree with everything that you're saying about what we intend to do, what we want to do. What I can't get clarified for me is it happening? So I know that you have an Office of Civil Rights. Every department has an Office of Civil Rights. No one is taking responsibility for collecting the data that tells us whether or not women and minorities are being either hired or contracted in these jobs. There's a gazillion dollars being spent. I don't want there to be an oops at the end of this process. We had every intention of getting to minorities and women, helping them to build their companies, helping them to build their skills, get their jobs, but we didn't meet the mark. So tell me, where do I need to go?
It's a very, very important question. I will say that I'll give an example of a program that within the Department of Labor. So we've talked about apprenticeships several times, right? Our budget request includes $335 million for registered apprenticeships. That's an increase of $50 million. In the last 3 years, we have expanded apprenticeships to different industries. I don't think I said earlier, there were no teacher apprenticeships for teachers when this administration came in. There are now
I know what you're doing.
So
I just want you to tell me, where are you logging in your successes or the gaps that you're missing? And then what would be the course corrections? I know what you want to do.
Yeah.
I know what you're telling people to do. What I don't know is whether or not it is happening and if the appropriate course corrections are being taken place.
Yeah. No,
Excuse me for interrupting you.
No. It is an issue that you are passionate about, and so am I. So within the apprenticeship programs, though, we are seeing greater diversity. So it's just, we know that when we make the right investments, when we are intentional about inclusion, we can move the needle. But there is much more work to do on that, and I would be very happy to continue to have conversations with you about how we do it right.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, through you, I do want to have specific conversations regarding this, because at the end of the day, I want to see the numbers. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Acting Secretary Sue, for being here with us today. As we discussed yesterday, you know that this past year I've been working with a bipartisan group of my colleagues to explore ways to improve access to paid family and medical leave. In January, our Paid Family Leave Working Group identified several areas of consensus among the members of the group and released a legislative framework with 4 pillars. One of these pillars included a proposal to create an interstate paid leave action network, known as the I-Plan, to drive coordination and harmonization across the growing numbers of states with paid leave programs. While these states share a common purpose in providing workers with access to these critical benefits, they were not built and designed to function in tandem with the program of another state, let alone the structural variations of programs implemented in now 13 states and D.C. This siloed approach has presented many challenges for workers, states, and employers, and is one of the top issues we hear about from our large employers with multiple locations around the U.S. The I-Plan would incentivize states with paid leave programs to create, adopt, and improve on interstate agreements to simplify the process for workers accessing these benefits, providing employers a way to offer a consistent paid leave benefit to their employees and improve the affordability of benefits across states for an increasingly mobile workforce. My question is this, Secretary Sue. How would improving timeliness, accuracy, and portability, all purposes of the I-Plan, help boost workers' access to state paid leave benefits?
Congresswoman, thank you so much. And I very much enjoyed our conversation about at least two issues that we both care deeply about, this and creating real opportunities in rural communities. So we are, the president says this often, the only industrialized nation that does not have a national paid leave policy. And this is costly. It's costly in the ways that I mentioned earlier, our study that demonstrates that if we had one and invested in other kinds of supports, right, in infrastructure that can support mostly working women, but working individuals, we could improve our economy to the tune of $775 million a year. This is significant. We also, through our Women's Bureau, do work to track and make sure that we know and states know what other state leave policies there are, right? So states can learn from each other. In the absence of a national policy, states can learn from one another. States can share stories about what's working and what's not, what some of the challenges of implementation are. So those are also some of the ways that we approach this space.
Sure, great. And right now, there's no shared technological systems across states with paid leave programs, which differs from other social insurance programs like unemployment and insurance. How does the absence of a shared technological system make it difficult for state paid leave programs to combat fraud and ensure program integrity?
That is a very interesting question. I will approach it from an angle that I know because it's something that we've been working on for the last few years, which is in the unemployment insurance space, we have seen that the lack of a national efforts to combat fraud can be very damaging. It's very difficult for states to do a state-by-state effort, and it makes sense to have systems in which there can be information sharing, but also flagging of different practices. So I am very happy to talk to you more about what that could look like in the area that you're talking about.
Wonderful. In the final fiscal year 2024 appropriations package, report language was included to encourage the Women's Bureau to coordinate a campaign designed to increase awareness of the tax credits for paid family and medical leave authorized under Section 45S of the Internal Revenue Code. How do you envision this 45S awareness campaign will be implemented, and will the Women's Bureau be working with other federal agencies and outside stakeholders to increase awareness of the 45S tax credit?
Yes, and this is another space I'd be very happy to follow up with you and have our staff work together so that we tap into your expertise and the ways that we can improve that outreach. I think again, what you're saying is true. It can be confusing, especially for employers who operate in multiple states. That is why a national policy is so important. But in the absence of that, very happy to work with you on this issue.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you.
Ms. Hoyer.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Secretary, for being with us. You have an extraordinarily impressive background, and I want to thank you for coming to work for the federal government. With your background, your training, and the recognition of you as one of the 100 best lawyers in California, you could be making probably 6, 7, 8 times what you're making as secretary. So we appreciate the time and effort you're giving. I want to ask at least 2 questions, and I'll be brief on the questions. I've had a Make It in America agenda. The last Congress was the most Make It in America Congress in which I've served. We're going to get lots of new jobs, and we need to train people for the jobs, as we pointed out. I want you to speak to the apprenticeship programs and the Career Training Fund, both which are looking for the same thing, making sure that as we create a surge in new industries with new jobs available, we've tripled or quadrupled the private sector investment in manufacturing over the last year. So speak to me of how we're going to implement that and reference the problems we've had in the Congress in getting to an apprenticeship program that can be agreed upon.
Thank you very much, Congressman, and thank you for your kind words coming from you. They really do mean a lot. So yes, we are in a moment of tremendous job growth and the need to connect job seekers to those jobs. I often say it this way. We are investing in infrastructure like never before. The idea that jobs should be in America, that we can make things in America, is very fundamental to the President's vision for this country, and I know to yours as well. Roads and bridges, physical roads and bridges are one form of infrastructure. Our workforce system is also infrastructure as well, as the ranking member said. And they are the roads and bridges that connect people to the good jobs they want and need, and employers to the people that they want and need. And we need that infrastructure to be just as strong as our physical infrastructure. So registered apprenticeships are really like super highways in that infrastructure because of the way that they connect. They're demand-driven, they have a good job at the end of it, and it's an opportunity to recruit from communities that might not otherwise be able to do a training program. I get to see them from Oregon to New York, from Chicago to Las Vegas. These are programs.
California to the New York Island, right?
That's right. And so our budget really seeks to double down on something that we know works, that is needed in this time. Part of our sectors include advanced manufacturing. You know, there's no reason, as President Biden says all the time, we can't make the things that we invented here in America with American workers, American talent, in good jobs that will provide a pathway to the middle class. So we have already expanded apprenticeship programs significantly. We have 6,500 new apprenticeship programs since President Biden came into office, with over 11,000 employers, and we know that we still have more work to do on that. So, that's part of building an infrastructure that will help meet the workforce needs of America's employers and create really good pathways. Oh, the other thing about registered apprenticeships that I think is important is because they have standards that can often be nationwide. I mean, I really hear this idea that one size does not fit all. I know that to be true. But when you have national standards, you also give workers more power to be mobile, right? Now workers are not just tied to a single employer. They have skills that they can use if they have to or want to move.
Madam Secretary, to what extent, as I referenced in my question, have our inability to come to an agreement on federal law impeded our success here?
I mean, it certainly is helpful to the field when there's clarity about standards and expectations. You also asked about the other career training fund that we have in place. The idea there is to provide about $10,000 for about 750,000 individuals for training purposes. Again, we know that not only do people sometimes not get to train for a job because they didn't know that it existed, but sometimes they simply can't afford to leave a job to do it. Sometimes they need supportive services, right? We said that all the time, that the inability of someone to get to a job is a massive barrier to them doing the job. It's not because Americans don't want to work. We are the most hardworking people in the world. The president says all the time, right? You could never bet against America's workers, but sometimes the infrastructure does exist for things like childcare, for transportation. And so we're looking to put a fund in place that would help to support those needs.
Thank you very much. Just one observation, brief, Mr. Chairman. It is interesting that we have a lot of people saying, employers are having a tough time finding people so that there are job openings. It's ironic that some contend that the economy is doing poorly, but employers can't hire enough people. That didn't
Mr.
require an answer.
Mr. Siscomani.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also, Acting Secretary Sue, for being here with us today. Nice to meet you. Representing Arizona's 6th congressional district, which continues to expand with new industry and career opportunities, I have a strong interest in ensuring that we're equipping our workforce with the skills and be able to compete not only today, but for future generations to come as well. So I've got several questions where I could go, but I want to focus in on two main industries. One is mining. As you know, Arizona is a national leader in the mining industry, but I've heard concerns from my constituents regarding Department of Labor and also the Mine Safety and Health Administration, MSHA, proposed rule regarding silica exposure. Now, specifically, there are concerns that the incurred costs necessary to abide by these regulations, these new regulations, are incredibly stark, and that industry they're concerned that they're not properly considered on their feedback. Their concerns weren't. So, can you explain how your agency reviewed and incorporated industry and stakeholder comments, in that process?
Thank you so much for raising that, Congressman. So actually, that's a rule that we just rolled out yesterday. We just announced it yesterday. I was in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, along with many miners who talked about just what the impact of exposure to silica dust has been. As I said there, the trends are going in the wrong direction. 1 in 5 miners get sick because of silica dust. They develop irreversible damage to their lungs, and their lifespan is cut short by an average of about 12 years. It's just an unconscionable situation. And our rule, as is true with all of our rules, was developed with input from the industry in mind. I think it might be important to note, based on what you said, Congressman, that one of the pieces of feedback that we took and incorporated into the rule is that while the rule limits the permissible exposure level for silica as well as other airborne hazards, it has a ramp-up time for mine operators. So for coal mines, they will have to come into compliance by April of 2025. And for metal, non-metal mines, they have until April of 2026, so they have 2 years. That is an example, I think, of what you were talking about, which is we can protect workers and make sure that nobody finds their job to be a death sentence, but we can also do it in a way that takes into account what the responsibilities of the employer.
And that's what I'm getting at. So I'm glad to see that the time frame for compliance was correctly extended. MSHA and OSHA appear to be operating off of maybe different silica standards, though, on this. And some companies are looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in compliance cost. What is MSHA doing, going to offer in the way of compliance assistance, especially when it comes to the feasibility of the medical surveillance requirement for mental and non-mental miners?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, metal and non-metal miners.
That's right. So as I've said, we are always, we provide compliance assistance as a matter of course, and would be very happy to do that also in your district with the mines that you were mentioning. I could just share with you, Congressman, that in terms of the comments that we got to the rule, we had 157 written comments during the public comment period. That did include comments from industry. We also held 3 public hearings with virtual and in-person participation, and over 500 attendees participated in those 3 hearings. So in terms of your
Well, thanks for that feedback, and I do want to take you up on the opportunity here to work with you specifically in my district with the mines. I have a heavy mining district. With the few seconds that I have left, I want to switch over to the visa conversation we were having earlier. I hear consistently from my constituents about issues with the need for more workers. This ranges from high-skilled to low-skilled jobs. In fact, there are many workers who want to come to work here and return home as well, guest workers from international. But as you know well, there are issues with numerical caps. How can we ensure that businesses are able to address their labor needs and non-immigrants are able to have more easily travel back and forth from their home countries to work here in the United States.
So I think you're referring to the H-2B program,
Yes,
which we talked about earlier. It's an important part of the, this overall puzzle of how employers have the workforce that they need and how we continue to protect workers and make sure that every job is a good job and working people go home healthy and safe at the end of the workday. We have put in place efforts to improve the speed at which we approve H-2B visas.
The numerical caps, if I may, because I'm out of time, so that specifically.
Wait, I will have my staff follow up to talk about those caps. Those are not entirely within the Department of Labor's discretion, but happy to work with you to understand what the challenges and the needs are.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Acting Secretary, thanks for being with us this afternoon. Thanks for the offer to have a conversation with you yesterday. I apologize that I wasn't able to carry through with that scheduled phone call, but I appreciate you reaching out and giving me the opportunity. My first question is this. On November the 3rd, 2023, the Department of Labor proposed a new definition of fiduciary with a 60-day comment period. I'd like to highlight that the comment period fell over two major federal holidays, which would result in a comment period that was less than 45 actual days. Many industry stakeholders and members of Congress sent letters to the Department of Labor highlighting the shortened comment period and asking for an extension for impacted industries to provide feedback. And despite that pushback, the department declined. It seems that perhaps the Department of Labor wasn't interested in hearing the constituency, and maybe that was because of pushback that the department had received in the past. And instead of extending that comment period, the Department of Labor effectively shortened it even more by holding a hearing on the proposal in the middle of the comment period on December 12th, 2023, requiring industry stakeholders to understand and articulate their concerns to the Department of Labor even sooner. I'm just curious, can you tell this committee why the department is not adequately considering feedback from industry stakeholders and rushing a rule that will significantly impact choice for low, middle to middle income Americans and result in millions of Americans losing access to investment advice?
Congressman, I'm glad that we have a chance to meet today, although we did not connect before this hearing. Thank you for that question. We absolutely want to hear input. I just want to answer that question straight up. There is absolutely no desire, no benefit on the part of the department not to allow full input, feedback, and letting us understand the impact of what we do. That is why we, in this rule, which this rule is a long time in the making, right? This is a rule that there's been informal conversations, and there were prior rules for probably 8 years at least now. But this proposal did include a 60-day comment period. That is that's standard, not just for the Department of Labor's rules, but for rules generally. We did receive over 400 individual comments and just under 20,000 petition submissions. I'm a little bit confused by what you said about, we did have hearings also, which were meant to invite more comment and give another forum in which to give comment. They certainly weren't meant to say, you have to do it now, and therefore you can't give comments at the end of the 60-day period. They were really more efforts to be open and accessible when it comes to hearing from comments. And in fact, the rule that we've proposed now is different from the rule that was proposed back in 2016.
I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to cut you off there respectfully. But I have to comment that your words seem different than your actions, because you received a very specific letter asking for more time with what I think is a valid reason, and that is there was two major holidays in between. So I hear your comment, but looks insincere. Let me ask this question real quick. The Department of Labor reported an improper payment rate of 22% covering the period 2020 to 22, in which federal taxpayers paid out nearly $900 billion in pandemic unemployment benefits, of which GAO has reported an estimated 100 to 135 billion was lost to fraud. What effect, real quick, can you tell us, would the department's 2023 guidance on the application of state finality laws have on how the department calculates improper payments?
Thank you for raising that, Congressman. I know we haven't talked about that at this hearing yet. So the UI system, as you know, right, is a safety net that helps workers get through hard times, temporary periods of unemployment through no fault of their own. And during the pandemic, it both delivered as you mentioned, I think you said almost $900 billion. I think it was like $880 billion worth of benefits. The vast majority to eligible claimants who needed it to get through those extremely difficult and uncertain months. And at the same time, the pandemic revealed gross inadequacies in the system, mostly born out of two things. One is decades of underinvestment in the system. So most states, if not all, the vast majority were operating under computer programs that were older than before, that were created before the internet was invented. And because the safety net itself doesn't reach everyone, Congress passed a specific program called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance that has been found where the vast majority of the fraud occurred because it was built in not to have the same safeguards.
Thank you. In respect of the chairman's timekeeping, I'll just thank you for your response there and say that I think that it is all of our responsibilities as appropriators and as secretaries and stewards of the taxpayer dollar that we do everything that we can to limit the horrendous improper payments. And
Yes.
I suggest to the chair we make that a top priority in this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. And I'm happy to follow up and talk to you about that too, because we have been making enormous steps to make sure that the system can function well in the next crisis. Thank you.
As we approach the noon hour, I will conclude with, I want to recognize the ranking member. If she may have some comments, I'll have some closing comments, and then we will adjourn. So, Ranking Member Lauro.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. If I may I'm going to try to make two points. I want to say a thank you to you, Secretary, for your commitment and focus on the issue of child labor. And quite frankly, not you're dealing it much more stringent enforcement, et cetera. But as a nation, we are going backward in this area. We have watched many industry groups are encouraging states to roll back child labor protections, laws making it easier for kids from 14 to 17 years old to work longer and later, and in occupations that were previously off limits for minors. 10 states in the past 2 years have introduced or passed laws rolling back child labor protection. I won't go through the details, but it's Arkansas, Iowa, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, Ohio, South Dakota, Wisconsin. And Iowa has passed one of the most radical laws. Children as young as 14 to work in meat coolers and industrial laundries. Teens 15 and older can work on assembly lines around dangerous machinery. Teens as young as 16 can now serve alcohol in Iowa restaurants as long as 2 adults are present. I would say we are going backward in this area. This is going back to the previous time in our history when we came forward with child labor laws to protect children in this nation. My second point is that my colleagues across the aisle repeatedly share their interest in fighting inflation. But as is the case for working families, each night at their kitchen tables, I believe actions speak so much louder than words. So I will ask, what plans do they have to help families afford groceries by taking on food companies that reap record profits due to price gouging? One, Tyson Foods, the largest meat company in America, more than doubled its profits between Q1 of 2021 and 2022, and raising the price of their product. What plans do they have to help working families keep dollars in their pockets? Well, we've heard folks today loud and clear. Let's roll back your department's regulatory efforts to fight wage theft, misclassified workers as independent contracts so that they lose federal wage protections, deny new overtime protection for millions of workers. This vision would take away earned wages from workers and their families, hurting their ability to pay their bills and to get by. We need to reject this vision, and I believe you reject this vision, which is why I will work tirelessly with you and the President to support the Department of Labor's budget requests, your regulatory efforts to make sure that working people are getting a fair shot in this economy, and that we use this government and its power to provide economic security for people and put money back in their pockets, helping them with today's cost of living. Thank you for being here, Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Ranking Member DeLauro. I just, in conclusion, I think we've had a very good hearing today, and a lot of members got to ask a lot of questions. Just before we adjourn, because I know a lot of folks have other hearings to go to and other meetings, but I do want to call to your attention about the congressional inquiries. It's been called to my attention that since you've become acting Secretary of Labor, the Committee on Education and Workforce has sent more than 25 letters, including a duly served subpoena, and the Department of Labor has failed to provide responses in full and forthright answers in these oversight inquiries. Also, the department's response to questions for the record following hearings, such as even this one, were often late and provided few insights on the matter that are important to so many members of Congress. I guess my question in closing, can we expect to more fully and timely get responses from your department as we continue on the remainder of the 118th Congress?
I mean, Chairman, it is my understanding and my expectation that we always cooperate, that obviously we respect the role of this body in oversight and all other matters. And if you are not getting what you need, then I will certainly talk to my team about that. But I trust that that is what they are doing also, and working closely
Well, like I
with
said,
yours.
it's been called our attention that has been an issue, and so if you could check into it, I would appreciate it. And with that, we stand adjourned.